my Royal Enfield Super Meteor 650 motorbike. First of all, let's talk about the motor. It's been around for many years now, tried and tested on the Interceptor. It's now gone into the Meteor 650. It's now gone into the Bear. It's now gone into the Classic 650. I love that engine. That's the reason I bought the bike. Now that it's done 15,000 kilometers and I did an oil change at 10,000 kilometers, I think the engine is only now broken in because it's riding superbly, driving superbly, pulling superbly, and the heat being generated is less. So I think the engine has finally broken in. I'm not getting a hot engine like I used to get. And like I say, I'm so impressed with that engine. And I did a 2,400 kilometer tour. 5 days later, I did an 800 kilometer tour, and my oil level hasn't dropped 1 millimeter. It's still on the same level. So it's not drinking any oil. It rides perfectly. It's not overheating. The engine on this bike is superb. So on the motor side of motorbike, very well done, Royal Enfield. On the bike side of motorbike, not so good. The seats, not comfortable. The suspension, not fit for purpose on the rear. The front end is okay, but the rear is not. Comfort issues, there's definitely a problem. It needs tweaking, hence the reason today I'm going to talk about what I've done to make the bike more comfortable for me, my preferences, and hopefully that will help you choose and make decisions how you're going to change your bike to make it more comfortable, because you will in time find out that it's not a comfortable motorbike, sadly. It was only 6 weeks ago I completed my 10,000 kilometer service for my oil change, and I made a video about it. There's a link here and in the description. I did my 10,000 kilometer oil change, and like I say, 6 weeks later I'm on 15,000 kilometers again, and the spanner is flashing. Yay! 15,000 kilometers! Yahoo! So this time it's not an oil change. I don't have to do that until 20,000 kilometers. But what it's telling me to do is to lube the chain and lube things. Luckily, I don't have to lube the chain because I don't have one anymore. And we're going to talk about the bike today, and we're going to talk about my accessories. Just give you my opinion on the bike and my accessories and my modifications, how we got to this stage. So my first modification on my Royal Enfield Meteor 650 was the suspension. I didn't want to spend money on noisy exhausts until I sorted out my comfort. So these things, which are crazily heavy, they look good quality. I've been informed they've been made by Showa, but they don't put their name on it. So maybe they're embarrassed to do so. They put their name on the front forks, Showa, sure, but they don't put their name on the rear. I think they spent most of their budget on the front because the front seems to be okay, but at the rear, totally useless. So I gave it 6 months before I changed these suspension units, trying my best to adjust preload and everything else, and thinking that they might bed in time. Throw them away. Absolutely useless, Royal Enfield. I do wish you would listen, because I'm not the only one that says it, and there's plenty of other people that say it. And now you're putting the same units on the Classic 650. Not a good move, not a good move. Royal Enfield, what you should do is give customers the option, like a backrest or a touring seat, give the option to upgrade the suspension unit at the same time on purchase, because all that's doing is putting suspension units into landfill. And I know that that's something that you're dead against. Remember your first one ride, recycling plastic bottles, etc. How about recycling your own shocks? I'm sorry to be very critical on this, but I'm very passionate about this, because on my first week of ownership of this bike, I rode 2,000 kilometers to Bangkok and back, and my first week of owning the bike, I did a lot of mileage on it, and I nearly broke my back because I was on preload 1. I had no idea about the preloads on this bike, and hitting potholes at high speed, it nearly breaks a disc in your back. So it's not a good thing. It really isn't a good thing. And the best thing I've done to this bike is change the rear shocks. So if you do buy a Meteor 650, be prepared to budget for changing your rear shocks. Don't pussyfoot around. Don't go putting noisy exhausts on and high handlebars until you sort that suspension unit out first, because it will save your back. I can remember when the bikes first came out, the Indians were buying the bike and loving the bike until they had it for a week or two, and they were selling it within the first 2 weeks of ownership because they couldn't stand the back pain. And it really does cause back pain. Not anymore. I've done my modifications, and now on our last 2,400 kilometer tour, myself and Mrs. T rode this bike for 6 days solid over a 9-day period, and the comfort was perfect, absolutely perfect. So we're going to talk about what I've done to my bike today, and then hopefully that will help you to modify your bike if you're experiencing comfort issues. So like I say, the first thing that I did to this bike was spend money on rear suspension, and I was lucky enough to be visiting UK at the time and managed to buy the Hagon shocks. Not only did they make it more comfortable for me, not only did it make me fall in love with the bike again, it also lowered the bike for me, because I chose the lowering shocks at the same time, 290 millimeters instead of the standard 310 millimeters. So that was a perfect first upgrade for the bike, and that's what I recommend that you do. The second upgrade that I did was the belt drive, and that wasn't through choice, it was just through circumstance that a friend of a friend put me in touch with somebody that was researching the belt drive. They'd already made it for the Interceptor, they'd already made it for the Continental. They just wanted to check if it would fit the Meteor. I was right place, right time. I offered my bike as an experiment to see if it would fit, and sadly it wouldn't. Shockingly, it's a very different rear pulley on the Meteor compared to the Continental and Interceptor, so it wouldn't fit. So they had to totally redesign it, and I had to go to Chiang Mai and back 3 times until it was correct. I'm on 15,000 kilometers now. I had the belt drive fitted at 7,000 kilometers, which means I've now done 8,000 kilometers on the belt, and it's been perfect, absolutely perfect. There's a lot of advantages to the belt. I'm going to talk about them quickly, but I'm probably going to make a separate video about the belt in the near future, because there's an upgrade coming on it. But it's so smooth. Between gear changes, it's so smooth. Before, when Mrs. T was on the back of the bike, every gear change, she would headbutt me on the back of the helmet between gear changes. Now, she doesn't do that at all, because it's so smooth between gear changes. So major benefits of the belt drive. First of all, no oiling of a chain anymore. I used to oil and clean my chain regularly, especially after washing. I did notice if I washed my bike and didn't oil the chain straight away, it would go rusty by the next day. And people that don't maintain their chains like I did, their chains and sprockets are wearing out in 10,000 kilometers or less. So not a good thing. Mine did 7,000 kilometers, and there's still a bit of life left in it. I have kept it, but what's surprising about the chain, there's no links that you can take out. It's a fixed chain. So people are complaining that after it stretches, there's no more adjustment on the chain. So even if your chain and sprockets aren't worn out, if the chain is stretched, there's no more adjustment left in it, sadly. So if you're in Asia, changing the chain is affordable. But if you're in America, Australia, Canada, England, the mechanic charges and the chain and sprocket charges, I think you're just as well off changing to a belt drive, because it will save you money in the long run. Instead of having to change the chain and sprockets every 10 to 15,000 kilometers, that belt is designed to do between 100 and 150,000 kilometers. And if you don't believe me, my next video is going to be a review on the Vulcan 900, and that's got a belt drive on it, and that bike that I rode has got 80,000 kilometers on the original belt. It's never been changed. So they do last and they do work very well. So you've got the advantages of no mess, it's so smooth, and it's more reliable. I've put it on, I've put the belt drive on, I did adjust it within the first couple of months just to get it right. the last 5,000 kilometers, I haven't touched it. Not at all. It's just set, it's good, it runs well. And then the next modification. Luckily, Trip Machine found my channel. They had faith in Teacher T, and they decided to send me the Expedition saddlebags, which I was very honoured and flattered that they did. And they've been on my bike and they've never come off since the day I put them on. I absolutely love them. They're so practical. When I'm on my own, I just run with one. I only need one to carry what I need to carry. But obviously when we did the tour, myself and Mrs. T, we had a his and her saddlebag, and we survived for 9 days away from home between two saddlebags. And we carried the bare essentials, but we survived, and they're perfect, absolutely perfect. And the best thing about them is between hotels, you know, in and out of a hotel room, you can take them off, carry them into the hotel room, unpack your things, pack it up in the morning, put them back on the bike. So such a practical thing. The Royal Enfield hard panniers, they do look good, but people are now realizing that they're not that practical. You can't take them off easily, they're not waterproof, they scratch easily, and you really can't put a lot in them. So these, for me, are perfect, and they're staying on the bike for sure. So thank you, Trip Machine, once again for sending them to me to review. I absolutely love them. The only thing that I have noticed, the only bad thing I've got to say about them is that they faded. You can see the difference in colour. They have faded, but that's due to Thailand's savage sun, right? It is down to the sun, plus they've got wet umpteen times. But I don't think it's a deal breaker. They kind of look cool and worn in when they're faded, and if I wanted to, I'm sure I could rub brown boot polish into them, make them brown again. So it's not a problem for me. Obviously the top leather parts and the straps and everything to keep their colour, and I have been using dubbing to keep them supple and waterproof, so they are really good. So we're all ready for touring now. I've got my suspension done, I've got the belt drive, I've got the luggage sorted out. The only thing I didn't get sorted out was the seats, so I did order the Royal Enfield touring seat and the backrest, and Mrs. T found it more comfortable for her, but not for me, because I carried out my own modification of my single seat with an angle grinder, and that made the seat very comfortable for me. So when I went back to the touring seat, it was the same discomfort, but obviously better for Mrs. T, because that original thin seat on the back, it's not really practical. If you want to give somebody a lift for 20-30 minutes down the road, it's fine, but don't expect your wife to go on the back all day with that very thin, tiny seat unless you want a divorce, because it's not comfortable for them at all, not comfortable for them at all. Luckily, I noticed on Facebook groups people were raving about the Sahara seats, so I did order the Sahara touring seats with gel fitted, and after a little bit of modification, I did have to put some gel underneath of them where they didn't have rubbers fitted, but after doing that, oh my goodness, I have ridden 8 hours non-stop on this bike, 8 hours non-stop, twice in 2 days, to go to Mae Hong Son and back. I didn't stop for a break. I just sat on the bike for 8 hours and went. I've never been able to do that on a motorbike before, never, especially this bike. And the seats were perfect, absolutely perfect for me. So that's what gave me the confidence to keep this one on for Mrs. T on our tour. And she found it the same, absolutely perfect for her. So the Sahara seats are perfect. Again, the only downside to them is that they've got stitching lines, and the stitching lines means holes. That means the water goes through the stitching lines. And then if the bike's left in the rain during the night, when you sit on the bike the next day, you've got a wet bottom. That's the only bad thing that we found. But despite that, I'd rather put up with a wet bottom than a sore bottom. So we found them absolutely perfect. And then since then, we've discovered the trick of rubbing dubbing into the stitching lines, and it definitely helps waterproof them. And then on top of that, I've recently discovered that somebody makes seat covers. So when you park the bike up over night time, it protects it from the rain and also protects it from the cats scratching your seats. So I need to get a cover made for this bike. I'm going to email Sahara Seats and recommend that they make fabric covers to go on them to keep them dry during the night. And I think you can even ride the bike with those covers on if it's in heavy rain, and they don't take up much room. It's better than having a cover for the whole bike, because you don't really want to cover the bike with a big sheet, because it takes about an hour for the exhaust to cool down on this thing. Another modification that I did was put the Bykology backrest on. The Royal Enfield backrest sits about here. It was too far away from Mrs. T to even use as a backrest. So the Bykology backrest is better because it fits on the side of the bike and not under the seat. And that reduced the friction on the Sahara seats, which made it more comfortable. And then we've got the added bonus of a luggage rack, which we needed for our waterproofs. If we kept the waterproofs in the saddlebags, by the time it's raining and we're trying to get the waterproofs out, everything's wet. But that way we could keep the covers on the bags, take out the waterproofs quickly, put them on, keep traveling. So waterproofs on the luggage rack is much better. Now that Mrs. T has finished the tour, I don't think I'm going to get her back on the bike again in a hurry for a few months. So I'm going to take the backrest off, and the rear pillion seat off, and I'm going to put my luggage rack on the back to make it like a bobber look. That's what's going to happen to my bike now. And maybe I'm going to get her a Hunter for her Christmas present, and then we can go touring together on 2 separate bikes. I think she would like that. So we have Bykology, we have Trip Machine, oh, we have Sahara seats, and then we have Auto Engineer. So 4 separate Indian companies making accessories for an Indian made motorbike. So it's kind of cool that Royal Enfield make a lot of jobs in India for different companies making accessories for their bikes. I don't know why they don't offer more accessories themselves. Maybe because they're too busy making motorbikes, I suppose. They definitely have made such a range in the last year or so. So like I say, I fitted the Hagon shocks to this bike, and I'm happy with them for the price that I paid for them. They weren't overly priced. And other people have tried the YSS shocks, and again, they're happy with them. So I do recommend Hagon, I do recommend YSS. Sadly, for customers that are in India or Brazil or Colombia, sadly you're going to get hit with import tax and postage and everything else, and it kind of makes the suspension units unaffordable for you, and I really feel sorry for you guys that that is the case. So if you're from any of those countries, could you please recommend in the comments what aftermarket suspension units you're fitting and if they're any good, to help others, because I get so many messages about where I can get the shocks, and when I tell them, they come back to me and say, oh, it's unaffordable, I can't afford that with the postage and the import taxes, etc. So if you're in the UK and America and Australia, I think it's okay. Maybe YSS though is a little bit expensive in Australia, to be honest, because they are made in Thailand. I should have some on this bike. I will try and research and get some. The reason I never fitted them is because I emailed them in English. They never bothered replying to me. I emailed them twice. They never bothered replying to me. So I will get Mrs. T to email them in Thai, and maybe I'll get a set to do a review on. I've still got a few more mods maybe I will do. I will now put some noisy exhaust on, I think. If anybody can recommend some nice exhaust, I'm happy to see some pea shooter exhaust coming on the market lately. I've always fancied putting pea shooter exhaust on this bike. I do see some becoming available, so that might be something I will fit to this bike. And also I've been offered another review product, so that is coming up in a video very soon. And for my loyal viewers, there is a hefty discount code coming your way very soon on this new product that is going to get reviewed by Teacher T. So hopefully I review it as a good product, and if so, there's a hefty discount code coming your way very soon. Thanks for watching, and Teacher T will see you in a video very soon. Until then, ride safe.